O God, let us hear your word, and see your word, and smell and taste and touch your word, that we might be your word in the world. Amen. Good morning, people of Covenant.
Good morning.
This is taller than I remembered it being. It is good to be back with you, especially for the beginning of this Advent season. It is a good day for an apocalypse. At least I think so. There are some seasons when you just have to lean into the skid. I understand we may not all be in the mood for one, but alas, it is Advent, and our lectionary is full to overflowing with shouting people. John the Baptist shouts for us to prepare a way. Mary shouts with joy. Prophets shout a warning and a word of promise. And so whether we're ready for the apocalypse or not, the time has come, which I think is rather fitting. I've been teaching a confirmation class of squirrely 8th grade boys and exceedingly thoughtful 9th grade girls this fall. During one of the weeks we talked about Jesus last month, they were asked to read different stories about Jesus, stories they had not encountered in elementary school, Sunday school classes. They were supposed to read these stories in small groups and come up with a descriptor for how Jesus was being presented by these different gospel writers. We had peacemaker Jesus, mysterious Jesus, and indignant Jesus before we got to the group that read this passage about Jesus proclaiming the end of the world. "This is explosive Jesus," said one of the girls, shaking her head, "and you can keep him." I don't want this one. "What about this Jesus is tripping you up?" one of the teachers asked. "All of it," she said, "this," sweeping her hand over the scripture in front of her. "This is nuts." This is a hard passage. I've spent a few weeks with it now, and just hearing it again out loud in this space made my stomach squirm a little bit. The way the text has been split up for us doesn't really give us a ramp into the destruction. It just opens wide in front of us. Keep your eyes on the sun and the moon and the oceans while you're at it. The seas are going to roar so loudly that the people who witness it will faint. Do you want to look at a fig tree? The ocean's too big? Fine. Think about the end of the world while you do it. The stars? End of the world. The earth? End of the world. Be on guard, Jesus bellows. The days are coming. Days of destruction and upheaval. The day when heaven and earth are going to melt into oblivion. Those days are coming. Don't be caught by surprise. Some apocalyptic moments come with a clear word of hope. The world will erupt in terror, and as soon as that's done, everything will be very good. But not this one. This one doesn't give us a safety raft to a different world or to heaven. This one just tells us to pay attention as this world tears at the seams. It is grim. I am tempted, I confess, to throw up my hands and turn away. This kind of speech cuts me off at the knees. It's like ice in my chest. It is hard to listen to this Jesus, this angry, awful, terror-evoking Jesus. It is hard to hear his words and find good news in them. It is hard to hear him speak like this and come away hopeful. It is a haunting vision. But these are haunted days. 2 weeks ago, on the Monday before Thanksgiving, there was a shootout in Sandtown in West Baltimore, one of the 2 neighborhoods where I've been serving as a chaplain for the last couple of months. It is unclear why so many shots were being fired in the middle of the day, but it is clear that the neighbors were used to it, because the second time this car made a pass down the street and its passengers opened fire, people ran inside and doors slammed shut. But a 5-year-old girl named Amy was still outside, walking with a handful of change and her baby doll to the corner store to buy sunflower seeds. She was hit in the side by a stray bullet and fell on the pavement. Her grandmother thought she'd tripped. Her shoelaces were always untied, she said later. I thought she'd fallen over herself again. But she hadn't, and so Amy was scooped up and taken to a hospital where she's stable and still recovering. This shooting sparked a 48-hour uproar in my new city. Shootings happen every day without notice in West Baltimore. Usually because they're so targeted, they feel distant. But as details of this one emerged, her age, the time of day, the way the car left the scene, rage climbed its way through the numbness that usually covers gun violence in Baltimore. "What are we doing?" lamented one community organizer. "Is anything I'm doing working? If a child is shot in my neighborhood, this is not working." A photograph of Amy's baby doll lying face down in the street by evidence markers ran in the newspapers. She was so young. And her family was already grieving. Amy's sister Taylor had died just months ago in a similar accident a mile away. Her family, her godparents, her grandmother all live on the same street in Sandtown, and the air is different there now. It feels like the heavens split open and turned inside out, like the stars might fall out of the sky at any moment, like the harbor downtown might swallow the whole city. The night after the shooting, some pastors were asked to show up in the neighborhood together. I parked on the main road and walked up the block, turned the corner. Even a day later, the scene was chaotic. People were getting off work and had heard news reports. They were flocking to the block where this thing had happened. Neighbors were showing up with signs of support: small stuffed animals, balloons, candles. A helicopter circled tightly overhead, its spotlight swaying up and down the block. Blue and red lights flashed all over our faces. Local news stations had sent camera crews, and police had barricaded the street, which seemed strange until I saw the mayor getting out of her motorcade. She'd heard the pastors were showing up. She stood in the street and asked us to stand in a circle around her. News cameras swung around to record what she said next. "I am working hard on this violence problem," she told everyone, "but the real solution is on the communities to find. You have to make your own neighborhood safer." Some of us started shifting a little uncomfortably. She finished speaking. Being surrounded by clergy, which had been a helpful press decision, was quickly becoming a liability, though. She'd wanted to issue a statement, not take questions, but when you're stuck, you're stuck. As she was trying to get part of the circle to move out of her way, a man interrupted her. "Excuse me, Madam Mayor," he barked. He had a homemade cigarette in one hand and his smartphone open to Facebook Live in the other. "God help us," I muttered. I almost walked away, but he planted his feet in front of her and in front of the pastors of her neighborhood, and he would not move. We all froze with him. The cameras panned to find him in front of the leaders of institutions that were supposed to help his community flourish and had failed him. Feet from where Amy had fallen, he spoke above the din. "You say it's on us, Madam Mayor, but if you talk to anyone in this community ever, you would know that this keeps happening because there are no jobs." The mayor and some of the pastors tried to offer him answers. "There are programs you can attend. There are jobs." She finished, "It's your fault you're not taking the help we're offering." They tried to make him out to be what I had assumed he was when he opened his mouth and started to yell. Another angry man confronting someone to prove how angry he was. But he persisted. Facebook Live still streaming, cigarettes still in his hand, feet on the ground. He replied, "I hear what you're saying, and that is not enough. We are desperate." Getting no satisfactory answers after another 30 seconds, he threw up his hands and turned away, muttering, "What you're doing isn't working. This isn't working." There must have been people gathered all around Jesus in the temple that day. This declaration he makes really starts 2 chapters before it, when he's made his way from Jericho to Jerusalem and spends every day in the temple teaching. This day in particular had been busy. He'd had a lot to say, mostly because something had set him off. The poor widow who was in the lectionary a couple weeks ago dropped her last 2 coins in the treasury collection in a final act of almost unnoticed desperation, only just before this apocalyptic moment. Jesus had seen so much suffering, but for whatever reason, she was the last straw, the last image of oppression he could take into himself before breaking down. In Mark's gospel, which you heard last week, Jesus walks outside and starts climbing a mountain to give himself a little room to breathe and reflect before he starts shouting. But not in Luke's account. Luke leaves him standing squarely at the center of the place where he's been teaching this whole time. He stands in the middle of his world, a rabbi in the center of the place where God dwells, a prophet in a long line of prophets. Luke's Jesus stands inside, surrounded by people and followers. I imagine the poor widow, now literally penniless, has just gotten her receipt and hears his voice rising from the crowd. The people he healed at the gates are there. The people who witnessed him turn tables as he entered the first time are there. He is with all of them in the middle of this place. He sees each one of them. He sees how they are being failed immensely by Pilate and Herod, by policies twisted by anxiety, by people fearful of losing power, by a small handful of leaders there who had forgotten how to love the poor, the widow, and the orphan, how to listen to them, how to love their most vulnerable congregants. He sees all of this and knows intimately the ways this isn't working. And so it is out of anguish and anger before these people whose desperation he knows that he pours out a vision of the world turning inside out. There will be signs in the sun, the moon, the stars, and on the earth distress among nations, confused by the roaring of the sea and waves. People will faint from fear and foreboding of what is coming upon the world, for the powers of the heavens will be shaken, and God will come into the middle of this chaos. Everything will fall. What is killing you will die. And that's it. That's the good news. The hope Jesus offers today. He doesn't go any further. He makes no promise of rebuilding, of a new world emerging and what it might look like, not here at least. Just upheaval with God in the middle of it. That's the good news. Can you hear it? There are some stories in the Bible that require a little digging, that need some reclaiming, that need some acrobatic interpretation to make sense of them and to find a good word. But the good news here hides in plain sight, at least for those of us who'd rather not see it. The good news is that the world we know will pass, and God will be here when it does. It's good news that flies in the face of our Protestant optimism, of our instincts to repair and renew and rebirth after death. It is gut-level good news, illogical, really only good if we know desperation. The desperation of dropping the last 2 coins you have into a collection box, of sitting outside the gate aching for healing to come but wondering if it ever will now. The feeling of picking up your grandchild from the asphalt just months after burying her sister. Of standing in the middle of a community with no promise of a good future. If you know that in your bones, or love with all your heart someone who does, this strange and angry word is the most hopeful promise imaginable. What is killing you will die. What could be more hopeful than the downfall of the way things have always been for those who were most desperate under their reign? The confirmation student who wanted to set aside exploding Jesus caught me after class. I know Jesus is a person and he's complicated, she started. He can be rude and angry, but the end of the world does not sound like good news to me. The world was working just fine for her. She couldn't think of the name of a person whom she knew for whom the world was not working. So why turn it upside down? Church, we cannot find hope in this story without hearing it while being beside the most vulnerable. We will not feel hope, no matter how hard we try in the world, in the places where Jesus tells us to look, unless we are in deep relationship with the most desperate, the most vulnerable. Beloved, may we keep watch and wait this Advent. May we stay awake to the crumbling of institutions that cannot care for their people. May we stay alert to the sun and the stars and the seas, whispering to us about the ways God is working around us. May we hear the cry of Mary, of Jesus, of John the Baptist, of prophets biblical and contemporary, telling us in their bodies and words that crumbling and upheaval are our greatest hope. Because this isn't working. Come, Jesus, come quickly. Amen.